some backup, and I might just end up being there. We'll see.
Great.
So,
Get a seat with a view.
yeah.
All right. I reconvene the 2019 Board of Review at 6 p.m. on July 25th at 6 p.m., which I already said. First of all, the roll.
Alderperson Journey?
Oh, here.
Alderperson Posey? Here. Mayor Diaz?
Here.
Alderperson Cole? Here. And the city clerk.
All right. I guess this is a parliamentary question, but can we approve the minutes if we don't have a quorum? No? No? Okay. So we are going to skip that. We'll move on to item 4, confirmation of open book and board review notices.
Those are in your packet. The affidavit of publication of the open book and board of review notice was published on June 13th, 2019.
Great. On item 5, verification of ordinance for the confidentiality of income and expense information, section 2-4-1, paren F of the Code of Ordinances.
And that also is in your packet on the last page. And again, that's section 2-4-1, parent F of our Code of Ordinances.
Great. I'll move on to item 6, swearing in of the assessor.
Would you like to do that, Dean?
Sure.
Do you solemnly swear for all matters on hearing for this Board of Review to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Great. Next, we'll move on to item 7, verification of open book changes.
I guess that's for me. So yes, I can verify that there were some changes made as a result of open book this year. I have recorded those changes in the assessment roll. So when I present the roll, it will include any changes made during open book.
Great.
Dean, would you mind just moving the microphone just a little closer to you, please? Thank you. Got it? Okay, thanks.
I can never get mine right either. Next, we'll move on to item 8, which is receipt of the assessment roll and the assessor's affidavit.
Okay, for the record, the 2019 assessment roll for the city of Verona has been completed. I have it in my possession. The assessor's affidavit has been signed and witnessed by the clerk, indicating that all assessments contained in the roll are true and correct to the best of my knowledge.
Oh,
Is it?
Oh, okay, now I can hear myself.
I'm sorry.
Should I start over?
Please.
Yes, please.
Okay, so for the record, the 2019 assessment roll for the city of Verona has been completed. The assessor's affidavit has been signed by me and witnessed by the clerk, Alan, indicating that all assessments are true and correct to the best of my knowledge. The assessment roll does contain the changes made during the open book process, and it contains all assessments for real estate and personal property for tax year 2019. At this time, I will present the assessment roll to the board.
Thank you.
Since we have a lot of time, would it be possible for you to repeat items 7 and 8, since I'm not sure if they got picked up by the sound system?
I think item 8 was what I just gave. Item 7 was the verification of open book changes, and as I recall, what I said for that item was that there were some changes made this year during the open book process, and that they have been duly recorded in the assessment roll.
Thank you.
Great. Item 9, review of the assessment roll.
So that is just when we're in recess. If you would like to look at the assessment roll, it's here and available for you.
Great. And now, item 10, allow taxpayers to examine assessment data. I don't see anybody here. So what we'll do is we will stay in session but recess, because by state law we have to be in the meeting for 2 hours. I'm not really sure why, but we're gonna follow state law. So with that, we will be in recess. And I understand you had a presentation?
Well, I just thought this might be an opportunity to talk about the revaluation that's gonna be happening next year, because we'll be getting a start on that this fall.
Yeah, if you could give us a summary, that would be great.
Okay. Sure, well then, I guess, are we in recess at this point, or? Okay, good. Well then, sure, I can get started. I don't have anything formal to present. I don't have a PowerPoint or anything fancy, but I just thought it would be a good idea to talk about, a little bit about, I guess, this year, how we're wrapping up, and moving into next year. It might be worth mentioning, this was a pretty light year in terms of new construction in the city. I think last year in 2018, the assessor added over $100 million of value to the assessment roll, or at least equalized value. And this year, we're looking at under 35 million for new construction. And part of that is Epic didn't do much this year. They kind of took a year off from construction, and some of the larger projects were not really started on January 1st yet. They're being built now, but they were approved last year, just didn't get started, and we only assess whatever was existing on January 1st for the current assessment year. Market values have been going up and up in real estate. Homes have been selling for higher prices, and the assessed values that have been existing have been carried over for most of the older homes or existing residences. We've just been carrying the existing assessment over from one year to the next. And in the years in between revaluations, the Department of Revenue will monitor the difference between sale prices of properties and what their assessed values were. And they'll run statistics and provide some reporting to the municipalities about where is your level of assessment compared to market value. And this year we're estimating, based on the preliminary studies from Department of Revenue, that the assessment level will be 80%. That means that we're 20% below market value with the current assessments. And when I assessed new houses this year, I kept that in mind, and I assessed new houses at approximately, I think it came out about that, 18 to 20% under what they really are worth, in order to make sure that those people aren't taxed at full value when everybody else in the villages is at 80% of value. And that's, of course, what the state tells assessors to do. We want to maintain uniformity. But the state says we're supposed to be within 10% of market value, so we're quite a ways out of whack now and not within 10% anymore. The other measure that they look at is they look at statistics for uniformity or consistency at that 80% level. So if we have a lot of sale ratios, and the ratio being the difference between the assessment and the sale price, if we have a lot of ratios of sales that are at 80% consistently, then we're okay. But if we have some that are at 70%, some that are at 90%, and they're all over the board, that means that the assessments are really not uniform anymore. It means that people that have similar value properties may not even be assessed or taxed similarly. And that's when you really need to have a revaluation and level the playing field, reassess everybody under the same market conditions all at the same time to get that consistency back in line. And that's what we're going to be doing next year. This can be a little bit traumatic when we go from 80% to 100%, because people are going to get notices of assessment in the mail. When they open the letter, it might show that they have a $50,000 or $60,000 increase in their assessed value. And on paper, it looks like it's all in 1 year. But really, we're playing catch up for several years of appreciating market conditions where your assessment never changed. So, and the way that the assessment notices have to be formatted according to the state is you have to show last year's assessment, and you have to show the new current year assessment and the difference, and whatever else you want to explain on there, you can explain. So we've got some other public relations materials and things that we'll get out there in advance, and we'll include some things when we finally mail out those assessment notices as well. But I think no matter what we do, there are going to be people that are just, they get sticker shock when they see that big of an increase all at once. Yeah. So it can be challenging, and a lot of people will say, well, I didn't do anything to my house. It's the same as it was, 7 or 8 years ago when we had our last reassessment. How can you raise it so much? I could see if I remodeled it or something like that, but really the changes are going to be mostly for, the big increase in market conditions. Even 7 or 8 years ago, we still had the lingering effects of the recession that had happened. 2012, 2013, condominiums were at an all-time low in Dane County at that time. And a lot of people bought, cheap, and assessments were conservatively done at that time, and now we've got a strong real estate market, and there may be people who aren't even aware that they could sell their homes for what they really could. And so part of our process at Open Book is going to be able to show people, here are similar homes, either homes in your neighborhood or homes that are similar in square footage and age, that have sold, and here's what they sold for, and this is why we appraised your house at what we did. So that whole process is, we have to go through that process to give property owners the chance to come to us, understand what we're doing, because we can't mail out a full-fledged 20-page appraisal to every single person. We just mail them out, hey, here's your notification of assessed value. If you have questions or concerns, we have an open book session, and that's where we can show you the comparable sales, go through, maybe look at what your neighbors are assessed at, and see how you compare to that. Sometimes people feel better if they're assessed similarly to their neighbors who have similar homes. But we will also get questions, why did my assessment go up 23% and everybody else in my neighborhood went up 17 or 18%, and it may not be everybody in the neighborhood, but we'll get those kinds of questions. And part of the difficulty with this and explaining this is that I cannot focus on what your percent increase was. I can focus on what your new assessment is and whether it's correct. But if we don't have uniformity to begin with, if we have people who are currently underassessed and people who are maybe higher than an 80% ratio on their property, it's going to take a smaller increase to get some of those people to the correct value and a larger increase to get others to a correct value. And so you will see that the percentage increases are going to vary even in the same neighborhoods. So it's important to understand that that's normal when you have a revaluation, that some people will go up less or more than others to get to that correct value. But it'll be a process where we first go out and visit the homes. We'll send out information in advance. I think that the way the city worked the contract is we were not going to be doing interior viewings of all the homes. We're going to primarily do exterior viewings, which will make things a little easier on people because then they don't have to try to schedule a time for us to come walking through the house and so on. But we may, the downside of that is if people have done things to their homes without building permits and the city wasn't aware of it, we're not going to capture those things in the assessments either then. Kitchen remodels or finished basements or things like that. So that's the downside. We may find out about some of those things from the neighbors who say, well, how come I'm assessed lower? And we look at the records for their neighbor and we don't have a finished basement, and they're telling me, yes, the neighbor has a finished basement. So we'll run into some of that stuff, I'm sure. Otherwise, we will go out and take new pictures of all the homes and commercial properties. We will do a walk around, make sure we're not missing things like decks and patios or garden sheds or whatever the case may be. And if there's anything that we're missing, we'll add that to the record. We will look for things like new siding and windows and updates like that that may or may not have been accounted for. And once we're satisfied that we have updated photos, updated records from our field visits, then we will reassess all the properties based off of the sales from usually about a 2-year range is what we'll look at. So we'll take a look at every home that's sold in the city the last 2 years, break properties out by neighborhoods, by story height, by age and square footage, and try to find the best comparables for each property. Ultimately, we'll have to reassess the land as well, so we'll look at what new lots are selling for, try to look at estimates of what the older neighborhoods would have for current land values. And commercial property is also sometimes challenging with land values, but that's a whole process in itself. And when all that work is done, we'll mail out notices of assessment to every single property owner, and we'll do that all at the same time. It'll be one big mailing. So just because we came out and visited your property earlier in the process doesn't mean you receive your notice of assessment any earlier. They all go out at the same time. And then we'll hold our open book meetings, and we'll probably have a couple of days of open book to give property owners some different dates in case the one day doesn't work, they can come in on a different day. We will ask people to call ahead or schedule an appointment online for open book so that we don't have a lot of people coming in and just crowding and saying, all at once, I want to talk to the assessor, and we can't handle all those people, and and then they just talk to each other and get each other worked up. So it's a whole lot more orderly if we have appointments in advance, then we know how many people are gonna be there. We'll bring some extra assessors in case people walk in without appointments, but it'll run more smoothly that way. And we may or may not be able to tell property owners at the open book if their assessment can be changed or not. If I have several different assessors helping me out, we may have each person talking to owners in the same neighborhood, and I want to make sure that if we do make any changes to assessments at open book that we're consistent. So usually what we do is we regroup after the open book, go through all the properties that we think potentially could need a change in assessment as a result of our open book, and then we will mail a new notice of assessment to those people as an open book change notice. And then it's their decision at that point if they will accept that change or if they're gonna wanna go to board of review and continue to challenge it. And there'll be people who come to open book insisting their assessment should be changed. We do our best to defend the value, but it really shouldn't be changed in our minds. And then we will either tell them, no, we're not gonna change it, or we will send a notice in the mail after review that indicates no change was made. And we'll see what we have for board of review hearings, but I think what we're gonna try our best to do is to make sure that property owners understand why the assessment is what it is. So I'm hoping the board of review will only be necessary for those property owners who have already talked to the assessor, who already understand as much as we can make them understand why the assessment is what it is. And if we cannot come to an agreement, then board of review is like a last resort for those people. And essentially, if we have board of review appointments, I want to be telling you as board members exactly the same thing I told the property owner during our open book. And I'll be happy to say that. I'll be happy to say when I spoke to Mr. Smith, we discussed this, and this, and I'm presenting the same information to you that I presented to him. And in my mind, this information justifies the assessed value, and here's why for reason A, B, and C. And it'll be up to the property owner at that point to present evidence to show that my valuation is incorrect. And that probably will be difficult to do. Unless we have somebody that gets information from a realtor or an appraiser at the last minute, and it's something I didn't have during our review, it's possible that they could find evidence like that. Or if somebody ends up coming to board of review who never did talk to me during open book, well, maybe they'll come to us and say, well, I have major foundation problems, or I have something about the house that I didn't know about. Maybe the exterior looked great, but their interior is really dated and falling apart and in bad condition, and since we didn't view interiors, I had no way of knowing that. Well, then maybe the board can make a change based on something like that. But we don't want a lot of people coming to board of review who never talked to the assessor. You can get your issues resolved a lot easier during the informal process of open book and not waste the board's time with things like that. And the board of review should not be a question and answer session either. There's plenty of opportunity for property owners to come and talk to me about why their assessment went up. The board of review isn't the venue for that. The board of review is a formal hearing where evidence is presented and sworn testimony is given. So it should really be a last resort.
Well, I think it's really good to explain things, and even if people don't agree, hopefully they understand why we did, or why the assessor did what they did. And I think, I guess one thing, are the appointments going to be at different times? Like, because some people work during the day, and if they're all like in the 9 to 5, it can be hard.
I think we'll run open book until at least 7 o'clock at night.
Okay.
And we'll run it more than one night into the evening like that, because we don't want to even give the perception that we're making it difficult for people to contest their assessments. We want to make it as easy as possible for people to meet with us.
Alder Journey?
So this is more for my own education than anything else. I'm just wondering, is there a category for affordable housing, or is that managed differently from the more affordable type of housing?
Are we thinking apartment buildings, or are you thinking single family dwellings?
Well, I think I'm thinking of both.
Okay.
And then I guess the issue, I don't know if there's that much affordable housing for ownership purposes.
Well, if it's a single family home, it's just assessed at whatever you could sell it for. So let's say, for example, that there's a higher demand for starter homes for young people to get into their first home, and prices start going up drastically on smaller, older homes, well, there's always the possibility that those properties are gonna see a higher increase percentage-wise in assessment than the larger homes. And I don't know if that's gonna happen because I haven't gotten far enough into my analysis, but it's easy for someone to say, hey, you're picking on the little guy now. You raised the assessments higher on the smaller homes, and you gave the wealthy people a break and only raise their assessments a smaller percentage. But if that's what it takes to get everybody to the fair resale value of their property, then that's unfortunately what's gonna happen. Sometimes there's a ceiling on what people are willing to pay for higher end homes. If there's only a small or smaller demographic that can afford to buy $1 million home, well then, those homes may not go up as much as percentage-wise as the other homes. That's all conjecture, but it's an example of what could happen and what we might hear at Board of Review. If it's apartment buildings, then we look at it as an investment property and we say there's an owner of this, say, 24-unit apartment building. What they're willing to pay, what they're willing to buy this property for, or what another investor is willing to come in and buy this property for, is going to have to do with the rental income that they can bring in and the operating expenses, because that's what investors look at. They don't look at replacement costs. That's what the insurance company is for. They look at what would another investor pay for this property, and that's how those will be appraised. So when you have affordable housing, if you have government subsidized housing, or you have, and sometimes senior housing can be subsidized and things, the assessor will end up with a lower value for that apartment complex if it is government subsidized housing, because of the fact that we are not allowed to consider the government subsidy as income when we do our income analysis for appraisal purposes. So you will find that a market rate apartment complex is going to be assessed higher than the exact same building would be if it were affordable subsidized housing. Don't know if that's what the
No,
question you
thank
were
that
looking for,
helps.
but
Yeah, thank
okay.
you.
Any other questions?
Good. Well, I will do some more, I think at least one more presentation before we have our Board of Review next year. What I'm thinking is, as you're aware, Board of Review has to meet once there's a 45-day period between the end of April and I think about the beginning of June, where the board has to meet at least once. What we can do is we can take that opportunity next year for me to kind of reiterate some of this, maybe go through the process of what it's going to be like to have hearings, make sure we're all on the same page with how the hearings should be conducted. But when you do have hearings, the property owner should have given 48 hours advance notice of their intent to object. Ellen can make appointments for those people in advance, or the board could schedule appointments after you go in session. And maybe if there's a lot of people, maybe you even want to schedule some appointments for a different date. I'm hoping there won't be that many that we need to do that, but it's always possible. And then the clerk would normally introduce each case. You would have a copy of the objection form that the property owner filed with their opinion of value and any supporting documentation. And the way that the statutes have Board of Review described is the property owner goes first. So they would tell you, what they think is wrong with the assessment, why their assessment is incorrect, and you would have the chance to ask them questions. I would have the chance to ask them questions. And then at some point when they're done with their presentation, then it's my turn to present. And I will provide the Board of Review members with copies of the assessment records. So you have our photos, you have our square footages and bedroom bathroom counts and everything in front of you, lot size, all that pertinent information. And then I'll go on to respond to any of the things that the property owner brought up, and I will present usually sales comparables as well to show what similar homes are selling for and explain why the assessment is what it is. The property owner would have the opportunity to ask questions of me. You as board members would have the opportunity to ask questions of me. And at some point, after all the testimony has been given and the arguments have been presented, the chairperson of the Board of Review should make some kind of a statement that the hearing is now closed, and then you would move into deliberations. You have the option of deliberating after each hearing, or you could wait until all the hearings are over and do your deliberations at a separate stage. That's up to you, but it's important to remember that you can't ask questions of the property owner or the assessor after you move into deliberations, because that would be entering additional testimony after the end of the hearing. So make sure that you've asked all the questions, and ideally you should already have made up your mind at that point whether you think the assessor's correct or not, and the deliberation is just amongst yourselves whether you agree or not, and somebody makes a motion either to keep the assessment the same or to change it based on this, or this, and what you should change it to. And then every vote has to be made roll call for that, and if somebody makes a motion to change the assessment, maybe some of you agree, some of you disagree. Well, then if the motion doesn't pass, you continue discussion until somebody makes a motion that passes, and either the assessment stays the same or the assessment gets changed. So
So is this the kind of thing that could easily chew up hours?
it could, yeah.
Typically, how many people get to this point, like before the board review after a reevaluation?
It's usually not very many, but I've had varying experiences. I've had some fairly, well, I think of in Dane County, I think of Wanakee and Westport are two revaluations that I did in the past. Wanakee probably had less than 10 appointments, and they had a big revaluation. This was in 2012, I think. It was maybe 7 or 8 appointments, and it took a couple hours to get through all those, probably 3, maybe 4 hours to get through all those with the deliberations and everything. Town of Westport had about 30, I think, and Westport decided that their board members were getting exhausted after about 4 hours of this, so they decided to hear appointments at half-hour increments. So they would hear, I think, 8 or 12 or so at a time, and then they would schedule the other ones for another date. And so they actually had maybe 4 or 5 different times that Board of Review met in order to get through that many objections. And I'll try my best not to let that happen, but don't measure my accuracy either on whether or not people choose to object. We're going to do our best to explain the assessments to people, but it may well be that my assessment is absolutely correct, and I still can't stop people from coming in and taking their legal right as citizens to come here and try to get their assessment lowered. You know, you're going to have some of that no matter what.
Cool. Anything else?
I think that's it. Should be an exciting year. We're going to start the field inspections this fall. I think it probably won't be I'm guessing till October. It'll be late fall. And then we'll work through the winter on field inspections, and then it'll be, more than likely, it will be with all the commercial properties and everything that I have to look at. It'll be summer next year, I would expect, maybe this time of year when we can have our open books and boards and things. We don't really itemize landscaping. Technically, we're supposed to consider everything that affects the resale value of the property, but with landscaping, it's hard to say what it's really worth. Does somebody have a nicer tree, or is your retaining wall worth $1,000? Or it's pretty hard to defend those things. So usually we won't add anything for landscaping. If anything, we might add a % or 2 for, curb appeal or something vague like that, but I think we would all be able to explain what that is. So it's not exactly an easy answer, but the short answer is no, we're not going to go out and assess your landscaping.
Okay. Thank you.
Especially if it's snow covered in winter. And
That's what prompted me to ask the question. Like, well, if you're doing it through the winter, that'd be hard to assess that kind of thing.
Anything else, or should we be recessed still? All right. Well, we'll hang out till about 8, and if anyone comes in, we'll deal with it then.
Thanks, Dean.
Okay. I think you might be back in session. The screen just changed that I can see here.
Okay, it is 8 p.m. No taxpayers arrived during the recess to examine the assessment data. We did cover all the required agenda items. We will get the minutes approved at the next opportunity we have quorum. So we are on to item 11, which is adjournment.
I'll move to adjourn.
Motion by Alder Cole, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alder Posey. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And we are adjourned at 8 p.m. Thank you.